The treatment of religious and ethnic minorities from the time of the Ottoman Empire and in modern-day Turkey is the topic of today's video. Welcome to Radio Rebellion. So, my dear friends and listeners, I already mentioned in several other videos that community concepts, in other words, visions of community, of a government in power, always have direct repercussions on the treatment of minorities, immigrants, and refugees. Okay, under the Ottoman Empire, the vision of community was, some scholars claim or argue, Ottoman multiculturalism. It has been argued that it is a pre-modern version of multiculturalism, but it has to be said that it is not, cannot be really compared to multicultural systems, contemporary multicultural systems, as we find in the UK and in many other countries, because modern day multicultural systems give equal rights. Okay, I want to underline equal rights to different groups. Okay, so but in the Ottoman Empire, the religious minorities, and this would be Jews, Christians, and different Christian sects, etc. They were given third-class citizen status, dhimmi status. Okay, so they were accepted as dhimmis, as third-class citizens, as people of the book, but they were not on equal footing with Sunni Muslims. So there was always a power asymmetry between Muslims, not only Sunni Muslims, but all Muslims, and religious minorities, Jews, Christians, and different Christian sects. Okay, so this is the difference between pre-modern and modern multicultural systems. That pre-modern multicultural systems, they were tolerating other, so something was going on with my camera, they were tolerating other groups, and modern multicultural systems, they give equal rights to all groups. Alright, I think since ethnicity at the time of the Ottoman Empire didn't exist as a concept, because it was only introduced, it started circulating in Europe. It started circulating in Europe around 1850s. We don't have to cover the treatment of ethnic minority under the Ottoman Empire because they didn't exist. That's why we now will continue with the Kemalist, how were ethnic and religious minorities treated under Kemalist rule. Again, community concepts always have direct repercussions for the treatment of immigrants. Now, they have a vision of community that they would frame as Turkish national secularism. Okay, now they had the vision of community of Turkish national secularism. So Turkish, we see the ethnic became important because before the ethnic was not important, now it became important. The national, now it is national, okay, because here it was the First World War. If there would be a timeline, here was the First World War. They lost huge amounts of territories because of the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire. So now everything that was left over of this huge cake that was the Ottoman Empire is modern day Turkey. So now it became a modern nation. So national was important for them, and secularism, because the Kemalist authorities were supporters and enablers of secularism, actually an authoritarian secularism it is called by some, because they were imposing secularism in an authoritarian way on a largely religious nation. Okay? Alright, what else? Okay, and now, of course, since now the ethnic gets highlighted, the social got reorganized along the lines of ethnicity. This is also why the conceptualization of what minorities are changed to some extent. Religious minority continued to be considered as minorities. I mean, the Jews, Christians, etc., they continue to be considered as minorities, but now also ethnic minorities, for example, Kurds and some other smaller groups, they were now considered as minorities. They were now framed as minorities because now we perceive the nation along ethnic lines. And one second. Now, it is important to mention that even though the community concept now changed, Ottoman had multicultural concept, they have a national community concept and a secular community concept. And now, even though this changed and the religious minority, meaning the non-Muslim groups under this community vision of community, were no longer securitized or were no longer considered as the biggest security threat. Nevertheless, they got politicized, and it has to be mentioned that always, and this already under the Ottomans, this continued under Kemalist rule, non-Muslim groups were always perceived with suspicion, because already under the Ottomans there existed the scapegoat discourses that that religious minorities, Jews, Christians and Christian sects, etc., they contributed to the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire because of their political loyalties with foreign nations, their networks and their sabotage. Because it is always assumed in many Middle Eastern countries that, religion defines political loyalties and so on and so forth. So they were already perceived with suspicion, okay? And 1 second. Okay. So what happened to now existing ethnic minorities? Because again, before the concept of ethnicity didn't exist, and under the rule of the Kemalists, a new conceptualization of minority has introduced. And by the way, for those who are not familiar with modern Turkish history, Kemalist because of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. So it was the name of the founder of modern Turkish nationalism. Okay, this is why we call them, or I call them, in general they call them Kemalist authorities. Okay, now how did ethnic minorities got treated now under this ruling elite? I will tell you, my dear friends and listeners, they got very much securitized. And this is because the newly founded state is highly state-centric, concerned about secularism and the territorial integrity, of course, of the new founded nation-state. Why did they get securitized? Because obviously now, here, after the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire, now the Turkish nation is small, and, the Kurds and their eventual desire for self-government and, separatism would be a security threat for the integrity of the Turkish nation. They could, their presence is, and their political influence is a threat to the integrity of the Turkish nation state and could lead to further loss of territory. So this is why the ethnic minority, especially of the Kurds, there are also smaller groups, but especially the Kurds, got securitized. And yeah, that's it for now. What else is important to mention? Let me think. Now, okay, one more thing I want to mention is, because they want, of course, like every ruler, the Kemalists wanted to have a nation that is easy to govern. And the more homogeneous my nation is, the easier it is to govern this nation, okay? But in the territory of the now modern Turkish Republic, there still live many religious minorities and now also ethnic minorities. But the ethnic minorities, like the Kurds, they represent a huge group, millions of people, so I cannot, eliminate their presence through population exchanges. But this has been done to non-Muslim religious communities because they were smaller communities. And so the Kemalist authorities thought, in order to create a more homogeneous population, we could actually just exchange them for, so basically we exchange non-Muslim religious groups for Muslim religious groups from the Balkans, from Bulgaria, from Albania and so on, okay, and from Greece. So we exchange them, they go there, the Muslims groups come to us, and so we get rid of these problematic communities that are problematic for the governmentability of our nation. This has also been done, to some extent quite successfully. And yeah, that's how they made the nation more homogeneous. But not but, it actually also should be mentioned that the Kemalist elites, political authorities, they were smart, of course, and they knew that the population on the ground was largely religious, functioning according to a religious cultural code, even though they were trying to impose secularism on this population. But they knew that, social cohesion was created through the uniting common bond of Islam, and this is why they took in more Muslims. Okay, so they were making very smart political moves, to be honest. Not that I think that this is good, but it was working. Okay. Now, also, in order to create a more homogeneous nation, the assimilability was important. So people who were exchanged, or those who could not be exchanged because there were millions, like the Kurds, they needed to be assimilable. So they needed Turkification policies, therefore, were implemented. So they needed to learn the Turkish language, adapt to Turkish culture, learn Turkish culture. And in order to assimilate the Kurds, also many of them were displaced from Anatolia to other parts of the nation, in order also to destroy the solidarity or to weaken the solidarity between Kurdish groups and so on and so forth. So many strategies were used in order to make the nation more governable, definitively. And I think I now covered all how they treated minorities. Let's move forward and talk about the AKP and their treatment of minorities now. Now, let's talk about minorities and their treatment under AKP rule. Now the community concept changed again. They highlight religion again. That's why they write Islamic, conservative, democracy. So they are Islamic and conservative, mean tradition is also more important for them again. And democracy, let's not talk about it because that's always debatable. But okay, religion and tradition is more important for them, and moreover, they imagine the nation as to extend beyond modern day Turkish nation-state boundaries. They have more a vision of the nation like the Ottomans had. But anyways, now let's talk about the religious minorities. But one must say that under the AKP government also had to deal with the EU accession negotiations that started around that time, and therefore, they were not always completely free to make any move they wanted. But in the end, on the ground, they nevertheless did always what they wanted. But in public political discourse, they were a bit constricted. I mean, at least what they said about how they will treat minorities. Fact is also that the international community, because the AKP's vision of community was again a religious one and a traditional one, was concerned about what would happen under their rule with the non-Muslim religious minorities. And that's why they interfered. They could also do so because of the EU accession negotiations, and they demanded from Turkish authorities that they would desecuritize non-Muslim religious minorities in front of the law and grant them the same rights as to people and communities of Turkish and Muslim descent, origin. And they considered this as an issue of international concern, and that they would supervise it. Okay? So, and now, But I still have to add something here because it is important. Non-Muslim religious minority and the AKP rule, they continued to be securitized despite the supervision of the international community and the League of Nations of religious minority issues in Turkey, because already, as I already mentioned, under the Ottoman in Ottoman times, these discourses existed that religious minorities have been partially responsible for the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire, and this, according to scholars, this scapegoat discourses, there might be some truth to that, I don't know. According to scholars, these are the legal political roots for the bad treatment of religious minorities also in the modern Turkish Republic. Let me see, is there something else to cover? Yeah, I mean, the international community lobbied a lot in favor of religious minorities in Turkey, non-Muslim religious minority, that they could live according to the customary laws. All of this has been formalized in the Lausanne Peace Treaty, but nevertheless, they continue, and even all of these treaties have been ratified, they continue to be scapegoated on the ground to a great extent until today. Okay, now before we move to the treatment of ethnic minorities under AKP rule, I still want to add another information about the AKP and non-Muslim religious minorities. So basically, the European authorities tried very much, or not only European, international community was very concerned that the AKP would securitize religious minorities. That's why they demanded their desecuritization. But as I already mentioned, on the ground, little has been done. And not only little has been done to desecuritize them, but also little has been done to force the outgroup trust of Muslims towards non-Muslims, okay? And this is why, the relations on the ground between these different religious communities are often still, in some areas, not so friendly, okay? Depends situationally on the region on many factors. Sometimes they can even be hostile or become hostile. Okay, but how do they treat now the Kurds? The Kurds, in the vision of community of the AKP, are part of their nation because they imagine their nation not as national and with modern Turkish boundaries, but more as a Muslim Ummah, beyond the borders of the modern Turkish state. And what unites them with the Kurds is their common faith, is their common denominator, so that they can include them in the nation, as long as they do not prioritize their ethnic Kurdish identity over their Muslim identity that unites them with the Turkish nation, okay? So for them, it was important, they are Muslims, but of course they always also highlighted cultural Turkishness, and this is why they tried to assimilate Turks. They were already part of the nation, but they were not, in their minds, I mean, they were not cultural Turks, so they were also assimilated to become cultural Turks, language-wise and culture-wise, okay? But, again, what they had in common with the AKP was not only religion, but also the AKP, in contrast to the Kemalist, they highlight the traditional, okay? And most of the Kurds, they still lived a more traditional life, so, okay? What else, my dear friends and listeners? Let me check my post-its. Yeah, so many in the beginning of AKP rule, many Kurds voted even for the AKP, okay? Because, in the end, in the very beginning, they, and most of the Kurds, they still function according to a religious cultural code, and that's why they perceived the AKP as actually good. Many voted for them, but now, when the territorial conflict arose again, this loyalty started to shift again, and also because of identity politics on the side of the Kurds, who tried to, to win their own ethnic fellows over, to win them over for their own interests. At some point, when this territorial conflict arose again, then the loyalties of the Kurds shifted again back to their co-ethnic, to their in-group, their ethnic group. And yeah, then there was a problem. Then they got into trouble with the AKP government, let's say. Okay,